Hello and welcome. My name is Vikram Chandra and you're watching This World. This week, the eyes of this world were on Bakhmut, a city in Ukraine that Russia has been trying very hard to capture. The battle has been ongoing for 7 months. I repeat, 7 months. Ukraine says it's not giving up. Russia's private army, the Wagner Group, says it already controls parts of Bakhmut. How true is that? Well, it's hard to say. What we can tell you is that Bakhmut has been reduced to a ghost town, with people living in underground shelters. What is it about Bakhmut that Russia wants so badly? We're going to be discussing that tonight. Also taking a look at what's happening on the war. And on this show, we're going to be talking about Elon Musk. It's been quite a week for Elon Musk. His car-making company Tesla finally made its 4 millionth car. But that good news didn't last too long because Tesla was served a notice by an American agency after reports emerged of steering wheels coming off on certain Tesla cars. Also on this show, how young is too young to be on social media? We're going to be putting that question to an expert. But let's start this show with a quick look at some of this week's biggest headlines.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is appointed for an unprecedented third term in office by China's rubber-stamp parliament following his election as the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party and Chairman of the Central Military Commission by the Party Congress in October 2022. Nine people were killed and several others were injured after a suicide bomber blew himself up in the Bolan area of Balochistan. The bomb went off as members of the Balochistan Constabulary were returning from work. All the 9 killed were policemen. Thousands took to the streets across France to protest against pension reforms. Protesters marched with flags and banners denouncing what they said was the government's refusal to listen to trade unions opposing the proposal to raise the pension age by 2 years to 64. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral talks with his Australian counterpart Anthony Albanese in New Delhi. During their conversation, Prime Minister Modi raised the issue of attacks on temples in Australia. The two also discussed the security situation in the Indo-Pacific.
और उन्होंने मुझे आश्वस्त किया है कि भारतीय समुदाय की सेफ्टी उनके लिए विशेष प्राथमिकता है.
8 people were killed and several others were injured in a shooting at a Jehovah's Witnesses meeting hall in Hamburg, Germany. The suspect was a former member of the religious community. Dramatic footage captures him firing several rounds through the window of the hall.
At the beginning, I thought it was funny because I thought maybe a teenager was shooting around with an alarm gun. But when I realized that people maybe were getting killed or seriously injured, I felt uneasy with this. Right here in front of my door in Alsadorf.
Earlier this week, hypersonic missiles landed in Ukraine, at least 6 of them, and we all know who fired those missiles, Russia. These missiles are called Kinzhals or daggers. They can travel extremely fast, and by extremely fast I mean 10 times the speed of sound. That's why they're called hypersonic. These weapons are normally carried by MiG-31K fighters, and they can hit targets as far as 1,250 miles. Also, these missiles are hard to track using on-ground radar. So clearly, these are the most sophisticated missiles that Russia has got. Here's what's also very important. Kinzhals can carry nuclear warheads. In short, these missiles are no joke. And the fact that Russia chose to fire 6 of these missiles into Ukraine cannot be taken lightly. The hypersonic missiles landed in Ukraine with a clear message. And what's that message? But that depends on whom you ask. Some analysts believe that Russia resorting to new age weapons reeks of desperation. The other school of thought is the hypersonic missiles are Russia's way of terrorizing the common Ukrainian man and woman and also telling the West, we are not going to give up easily. Let's turn to the first point though. What is it that's making Russia so desperate? Bakhmut. this city. It's located close to Donetsk and Luhansk, and Russia's been trying to control it for 7 months. 7 months, as I've been telling you, that's how long the battle for Bakhmut has been ongoing. 7 months on, there's a stalemate. In fact, this entire situation is starting to look like World War I, not like a more modern-day war. Trench warfare, entrenched warfare, neither side not moving too fast. Why does Russia want Bakhmut? Well, before the war, just about 70,000 people lived in the city. Today, most of them have left. Those who've stayed behind live in underground bomb shelters. This city was known for its salt and gypsum mines. It also had huge wineries. Today, of course, Bakhmut is a ghost town. It's of little economic value. And yet, Russia's putting all hands on deck to win Bakhmut. Some 20 to 30,000 Russian soldiers are already believed to have died or have been injured in the bloody battle for Bakhmut. So we're back to the question, what is it about Bakhmut that Russia is so desperate about? Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has an answer. Here's what he told an American media outlet earlier this week, and I'm quoting, "We understand that after Bakhmut, they could go further. They could go to Kramatorsk. They could go to Sloviansk. This would then open the door for the Russians after Bakhmut to other towns in Ukraine in the Donetsk direction." In short, Ukraine believes that if Bakhmut falls, it opens the gate. Towns and cities nearby will also fall. Now that's what Ukraine is saying. The problem here is that not all analysts agree. Some believe that the fight for Bakhmut is more symbolic than strategic. One, Russia is desperate for a victory because it's been quite some time since Russia actually won Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and some of those are the last sizable victories that Russia had, and that was some time back. Now, Bakhmut is Russia's best bet for another victory. Why? Because the fight here has been ongoing for long enough. Russia hopes that Ukrainian troops may somehow just drop the ball now. Kiev says that's not happening. It's going to go on fighting in Bakhmut as long as it can. I guess the key question is also the losses that the Ukrainian side is taking. How many Ukrainian troops have died in Bakhmut? Well, NATO says only 1 Ukrainian is dying for every 5 Russian, but that is NATO, and you can't necessarily expect it to be objective in this war. Now, there is, of course, a third player involved in the fight for Bakhmut, Russia's private army, the Wagner Group. And this is important. Currently, this is at the heart of the battle for Bakhmut. Now, the group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, wants to make a point by winning Bakhmut, and that's to show Russia that the Wagner Group can win a battle that the Russian army can't. Basically, Prigozhin wants to show Moscow that his fighters are better than the regular Russian troops. And there's a backstory here as well. You see, this man, Prigozhin, is close to Vladimir Putin, but he does not get along so well with Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. In fact, Prigozhin is often heard criticizing Shoigu's tactics, and Bakhmut is Prigozhin's chance to settle his score with the defense minister. Guess what? He doesn't seem to be too far behind. Earlier this week, the Wagner Group claimed control of eastern Ukraine. Prigozhin wasted no time in making this announcement.
Wagner Group regiments have taken the whole of eastern Bakhmut. Everything east of the Bakhmutka river is fully controlled by Wagner Group. This can be reported.
Now, Ukraine didn't confirm this, but something that the NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said earlier this week did not really infuse too much confidence.
We can not rule out that Bakhmut may eventually fall in the coming days.
What happens if Bakhmut falls? Zelensky has given you the answer to this question. But the fact of the matter is, Bakhmut has not yet fallen. It's still very much a part of Ukraine, and there is a stalemate. Is that what is making Russia desperate? It has to win Bakhmut, because if it can't win Bakhmut after everything it has done, then where does the war go from a Russian point of view? Is that the reason behind the barrage of hypersonic missiles landing in Ukraine? Also, where does the war go from here? Well, let me throw that question to Dmytro Zerutykhin, who's the former Deputy Minister of Information Policy in Ukraine. He's joining us now from Kiev. Thank you so much, Mr. Zerutykhin, for joining us. Just give us the perspective on how the war is going at the present moment, according to you.
Thank you for having me. Well, Ukrainians keep suffering from the massive missile attacks on the civil infrastructure all over the country, from east to west, from south to north. Almost every region is being hit by the Russian missiles, and the awful part that we don't understand, and no one understands what they want to achieve by shelling all the cities and especially the energy objects. When it was like November and December, so it was rather understandable. So they wanted to switch off the energy for all the civil inhabitants of Ukraine and to make them protest against Ukrainian government, that Ukrainian government is not delivering the heating or energy or lights to the citizens. So now it is already warm in Ukraine. It is spring, so it doesn't matter whether you heat the energy structures or not, because nothing will happen. So the awful part that this is absolutely insane because it doesn't make any effect neither to Russian army nor to Ukrainian citizens. So it's just a terror. It's just a terror against civil infrastructure and energy infrastructure.
Right.
As for the front lines, everything is very tough, but controlled by Ukrainian army. And yes, in the spring we expect some changes on the front line because of the Western arms are to come to Ukraine, and the diplomatic field, of course, is also struggling for the air jets, also as a part of the Western support in military domain.
If I could just ask you about the missiles first. Russia has fired hypersonic missiles into Ukraine. As far as I know, I think that's the first time those missiles have actually been used in a war or a warlike situation. What is your understanding of that? Why do you think these new age weapons are being used? Is it shock and awe? Is it to terrorize Ukrainians and to say we're going to bring more advanced weaponry into play here?
I have to say I'm not a kind of military expert, and I don't think that Russia has too many hypersonic missiles. So this is a quite costly instrument, and they have already go below the line, the limit they have to save for themselves. So instead of they saying that they are fighting against NATO, but NATO is not yet come to the front line. So there is no NATO that they are fighting against. But in the same time, they have a minimum of their hypersonic missiles now because they spent everything on Ukraine. More than this, we have Belgorod, which is a Russian city just near Ukrainian border on the north. So if some simple missiles like S-300, excuse me, so if they are shooting against Kharkov is a Ukrainian 1 million city in the east of the country. So if they shoot in Kharkiv, so it is only takes 50 seconds for the missile from S-300 to reach Kharkiv, to reach center of Kharkiv from Belgorod. So they do not have to use hypersonic missiles to kill people and to shell the energy infrastructure because they are just standing along the border and they're using very ordinary missile weapons. And the problem is that Ukraine is not responding. So Ukraine has its own strategy to liberate and to free its own territory, to reach the territorial integrity. So Ukraine is not shooting against civil inhabitants of the Russian cities. So we even cannot respond, eliminating the missile systems that are located in a city like Belgorod, which is on the Russian territory.
Right. If you can just share with us, and we were talking about the front line a short while back, it all seems to be boiling down to a fairly big battle over Bakhmut. It's been raging for a long period of time. The Russians are feeling that they could potentially capture it. Yet the Russians are taking heavy losses, but so is Ukraine. Ukraine is also losing a lot of soldiers there.
Absolutely. We're also suffering a lot with the losses. Of course, this number is not disclosing, but we all understand the cost that is being paid for our freedom and for our independence. On the other side, I have to say that in March 2022 and in February 2022, the Western intelligence services, they gave us only 72 hours to stand against the Russian full-scale invasion. So now it is already, how many, 369 days instead of 72 hours we are standing. So now the Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, he said that it is highly possible that Ukraine will lose the city of Bakhmut on the east of the country. Well, I have to say that Western analysis around Ukraine, it was a big false previously, and I think it is. We have highly probability that it's going to be again the false analysis of what Ukraine capable for now. But of course, the situation is very dangerous still, because not only because of the Russian army, but because of the so-called Wagner group that is being filled with former jailed people, drug dealers, rapers, killers, murderers, and so on and so forth. So they were picked out from jails by Mr. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is close to Vladimir Putin. And now all these people, they are being like expendables on the front. So, of course, where we losing our best people, Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian warriors, they are just losing these people who are somewhere out of the Russian society. They were jailed. They had to stay in jail for another 20 years, and now they are being taken from jails and sent to the front. So this is the very disappointing part, because we are losing best people. They are losing people from the jails.
So that's one of the questions when you're looking at the path ahead, and frankly the entire world's looking at the situation. You're absolutely correct. Ukraine has lasted more than a year, and many people have felt it was going to be 2 or 3 days. But it's not very clear how this war is going to come to an end. Do you think a military victory for Ukraine is at all possible? Or at some point will there have to be a negotiated settlement and a search for a negotiated settlement? Otherwise, this could continue for a long period of time.
To make it very straight, I don't think that Vladimir Putin is ready to propose something for negotiations. Now what he's saying, he's proposing Ukraine to accept all these territory losses, but we are not talking about territory losses. We all have seen the nightmares and atrocities in Bucha, in Kherson, in other cities captured by Russian army after the full-scale invasion. And we are talking about people staying on the occupied territories, occupied by Russian army territories. They are being tortured, raped, and killed. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, for these people, of course, fortunately, Ukraine will never give them up. Ukraine will never agree to sacrifice all those people that are living on the occupied territories, because human rights, this is the priority value that we prevail as a part of our vision. So unfortunately, Vladimir Putin has nothing to propose for Ukraine on these negotiations. And instead of trying to reach certain agreements, they're trying to press Vladimir Zelensky and Ukrainian government to go for these compromises. So it will never happen. We just don't have any other way but to win this war by getting our territorial integrity back, by reaching the control of our borders internationally recognized in 1991. And I think we are totally capable to do this with the Western support, because Russia has already lost this war. However, like my fellow colleagues and experts say, Russia has lost this war, but unfortunately Ukraine has not won this war yet, because unfortunately the world and the Western world and other countries and G20 people are not ready yet for Russia and Kremlin to be defeated, because we don't understand how the country like Russia, with these crazy atrocities and nuclear weapons, will look like after the defeat. When we will make all the people on the planet ready for Russian defeat, Ukraine will win the same day.
Of course, you do require Western help and Western arms and Western support to be able to do that. I mean, Ukraine by itself would find it difficult to do it without everyone doing it. But your position is clear. You're saying there can be no compromise. Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, all of them have to be part of Ukraine, and it has to end with a Russian defeat. Otherwise, it won't be acceptable to Ukraine. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Zolotykin, for joining us with that perspective from Kiev. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for more on all of that, we're now being joined by Fred Meyer, who's a journalist and a political commentator who's in Moscow right now, just on the outskirts of Moscow. Mr. Meyer, thank you so much for joining us. Just help us understand what exactly is the Russian perspective on where this war is right now, and in particular, the focus on Bakhmut is becoming really important for Russia, it seems.
Well, the war has had several iterations. It just seems that the Russian strategy has been changing. Perhaps their appetite is diminished, but they are definitely intent on winning and taking at least the eastern parts of Ukraine, the Donbass, Zaporozhye, Kherson region, that they have already annexed. And these are areas where, Russians have been fighting and generally winning for 300 years. I mean, they've fought in this region. They've fought Poles and Turks and Swedes and French and Germans. They fought a civil war over this territory. This is the historical perspective, I think, that a lot of people don't understand, that informs the Russian mind and why they're fighting and why they'll continue to fight. But it's a matter of raising social resources and economic and military potential to actually win, because I don't think the Russians expected that Ukraine would have support pretty much of the United West. They didn't expect the Ukrainians to fight quite as hard and determinedly as they are. So Russia has been slow to mobilize men, very slow to get its economy on a war footing, but this is all happening now. And the battle around Bakhmut, it's like Stalingrad. It is a horrific battle of attrition. It just is absorbing men and resources on both sides. And the Russians, of course, need to take Bakhmut if they're going to keep moving westward. They're in the Donbass. And the Ukrainians similarly think that Bakhmut will be, if they lose there, then the rest of the dominoes will collapse in the east for them. I think Zelensky said something pretty much like that the other day.
Yes,
so therefore,
just played a little bit out of it. So you're saying Bakhmut is almost being viewed as a Stalingrad sort of a situation. It holds the key. Ukrainians feel that if Bakhmut falls, then there'll be a domino effect, swooping to the west. But does Russia have the capability, even if it wins Bakhmut, to really advance very fast? Because if you look at the last 7-8 months, it's been a bit of a stalemate. It's not that the Russians are really having the ability to advance very fast. Bakhmut or no Bakhmut?
Yes, I think as I said, the Russians started the war with a completely different strategy and not enough forces. They had like 200,000 men altogether when they went in a year ago. They have gone through one mobilization now and added 300,000, although you probably have to subtract a lot of losses from that. But still, they have not got the forces that they need to actually win the war. Ukraine is now on its 6th mobilization, and they're like pretty much maxed out on manpower. So I think the perspective in Moscow is that mathematics will prevail. Russia will probably have another mobilization in the spring. Their war industries, which are the former Soviet military-industrial complex, are just getting geared up. I think that the Russians are, people I talk to, people I know, even those who are really critical of the war, think that in the long run, the sheer weight of Russia with 4 times the population, a working industrial economy, is going to defeat Ukraine.
Mathematics is one thing. Mathematics is one thing. I mean, let's not forget, in the past, countries like Israel defeated the united combined forces of the Arab countries, which were, not 4 times more, but 10 times more. So that can happen. We just heard, the former one of the ministers for information from Ukraine talking to us and saying people thought that Ukraine would last 72 hours. It's been a year. Do not underestimate our fighting capability. There are 30, 40 million people in Ukraine. It's not that it's an insignificantly small country. So are the Russians also continuing to underestimate Ukrainian resilience and resolve?
I think you're absolutely right that nobody expected that, and Ukraine has got a national spirit. They clearly are fighting brilliantly. And they've taken advantage of Russian blunders, mistakes, bad, still incoherent strategy. But I don't think that the Russians underestimate the Ukrainians anymore. At least I do know a couple of Russian war correspondents who are down there all the time. They are the main news gatherers for the Russian media. And they express nothing but admiration for the fighting capabilities of the Ukrainian soldiers. So I guess that's true. And wars are inherently unpredictable. But one of the things that has become clear is that although Ukraine is supported and supplied by the West, Western technology is not vastly superior to Russian technology. The level of Ukrainian training isn't really better than the Russian training. I mean, if you look at the Middle East wars, Israel defeating all those Arab countries, it's because Israel was a modern industrial country with highly educated, capable population, and they were all kind of peasant societies. This is different. These two are equally matched in many respects, and yet Russia does enjoy these vast numerical advantages.
Right. One last question. The fact that Russia is now using new age, the most advanced weaponry that it's got, like hypersonic missiles, which it's been firing into Ukraine. What does that signal? Is it desperation, or is it a signal that Russia is about to increase up the ante further?
Well, one thing you can say after years, they're definitely not running out of ammunition, because we've heard that over and over again. In fact, they probably have shortages of ammunition, and what I hear, because this is all top secret information, but the Russian war industries are running on 3 shifts a day. They're working and supplying at least most of what the Russian army will need. And we know from various independent studies that some of the missiles hitting in Ukraine have been, when their pieces are analyzed, they've been built recently. So they're not running down stockpiles alone. They are replenishing. And that must be jarring news in the West and in Ukraine.
All right, Mr. Meyer, thank you so much for joining us. So clearly doesn't look as if there's going to be an immediate solution on the battlefield. Let's see what happens in Bakhmut. I guess Bakhmut may well hold the key in many, many ways. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's been quite a week for Elon Musk. The Tesla CEO has seen ups and downs in his electric car making company. The good news first. Tesla finally made its 4 millionth car. How is that a big deal, you ask? Well, it took Tesla 12 years to build its first million cars, 18 more months then to build the 2 millionth car, and 11 months to touch the 3 million milestone. 7 months later, and 20 years since the inception of the company, it has finally made its 4 millionth Tesla. So clearly, a fast exponential increase in the cars it is making. But just in case you didn't know, Tesla was founded on the 1st of July 2003. We're in March 2023. Does every car maker take this long to ramp up and to make 4 million cars? Well, actually it varies. It varies from one company to another. In 2020, for example, Tata Motors produced its 4 million passenger vehicle. While the company was established in 1945, it only, of course, began making passenger vehicles in 1988. It was making electric engines before that, and that, of course, with the launch of Tata Mobile. So it took the company 75 years to make 4 million vehicles. Basic point is the timeline varies. But the real question around Tesla has been the valuation. Is its technology disruptive enough to justify the sky-high valuation that it still trades at? And that's after a recent fall. Today, Tesla is the world's most valuable automaker. It's worth $562.43 billion. Yes, as I said, that's lower than what it once was. It was at $1 trillion a short while back, but it is still much higher than its competitors. No automaker comes close. And that's why many Tesla critics say that the valuation is way too high. Although, to be fair, they have been saying that for a while. And they've also been wrong for a while, and short-selling attacks on Tesla have often failed. Bigger questions are around fresh investigations on safety, and also questions around Elon Musk himself. Earlier this week, the car maker was served a notice by the US safety regulators. They announced an investigation into instances of steering wheels coming off on some SUVs. The probe will also extend to an 18th February fatal crash, where a Tesla Model S ran into a parked fire truck in California. The incident was not a one-off. Tesla cars have been involved in numerous crashes, bringing its safety into question. But Tesla fans say that there's too much focus on Tesla. It's not as if other cars don't have crashes. They don't necessarily make these many headlines. Many feel, though, that a real risk factor for Tesla is its charismatic, brilliant, but somewhat erratic boss, the one and only Elon Musk. Now we know the usual questions. Is he distracted by Twitter? Is he too impulsive? But also in question this week was Elon Musk's sense of empathy, courtesy a Twitter interaction with one of the platform's former employees. This employee's name is Haraldur Thorleifsson. He joined Twitter in February 2021. Earlier this week, he tweeted that he could no longer access his work computer, adding that the head of human resources was not able to confirm if he was still employed with Twitter or not. Musk responded to the tweet, asking about his job profile. Thorleifsson replied by saying revealing his profile would be a breach of the company's confidentiality clause. Musk replied that he could go ahead and talk about his profile. Thorleifsson obliged. Musk replied with the laughing emojis, indicating that Thorleifsson had been sacked. Was it brutal? Yes. Was it uncalled for? Absolutely. And it was certainly unbecoming of a boss. But then, the situation deteriorated sharply for Musk after Thorleifsson took to Twitter to detail his disability and the issues around it. All of that made Elon Musk look really bad, and he had to apologize. The internet wasted no time in calling out Musk. One Twitter user, in fact, branded Musk sociopathic. Now tell me one thing. How is one to read this man? Elon Musk left the world utterly confused with the Twitter acquisition saga and with everything that followed. Today, reports say that he doesn't have enough engineers to run the platform, let alone make it the platform for free speech. But for all the back and forth, all the public name-calling, all the showdowns, Musk is still one of the world's richest and most powerful men. Nothing seems to affect his brand value, and there are more than enough people who believe he is one of the most gifted entrepreneurs ever. Let's not forget, Elon Musk is the man who has changed industry after industry, from EVs to energy to to space, to boring, even AI. Remember, he was one of the people who set up OpenAI to start with. So how does all of this happen? How can somebody be so many different people bottled into one? And to talk about TMT or Twitter, Musk and Tesla, I'm now being joined by Daniel Ives. He's the Managing Director and Senior Equity Analyst at Wedbush Securities. Daniel joins us from New York City. Welcome to the show, Daniel. So another up and down week for Tesla, and certainly an up and down week for Elon Musk, and there have been many. How do you see all that's happening with him and with Tesla and with Twitter?
Look, I mean, clearly it's been an up and down roller coaster, as we saw with the Twitter situation. But I do believe Tesla's really started to see a rebound this year because Musk has really started to tone down some of the rhetoric. And ultimately, the demand story has started to benefit Tesla. I think from a Wall Street perspective, there's still skepticism. But if you look at the last few months, it's definitely been some positive times, and that's reflected in Tesla stock.
Well, let's just look at Tesla for a moment. I know there are a lot of people who say Tesla is still overvalued. Look at that, $500 billion. But people have been saying that for a while. They were saying that Tesla was overvalued when it was much smaller. Short-selling attacks failed. Tesla went all the way up to hit a $1 trillion valuation. How do you view the valuation of a company like Tesla?
Look, I view it that Tesla is a disruptive technology name. I never grouped it with regular auto companies because of ultimately electric vehicles. And I think their opportunity to monetize, that's just unique. Now, with that said, competition's increasing across the board. You see price cuts, you see uncertainty. So you've seen that valuation compress a bit last year. But in my opinion, this ultimately is a valuation that will start to approach yet again $1 trillion.
So then, of course, there are those questions around Elon Musk that I was just referring to. He's obviously a charismatic, he's brilliant, he's also erratic. How do you see the impact that he still has on the companies that he runs, whether it's a Twitter or a Tesla or a SpaceX?
I mean, Musk has had the golden touch. I mean, when it comes to Tesla as well as SpaceX, I think in many opinions, he's a modern day Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison. Now, that said, I think with Twitter, he went through a Howard Hughes moment, and I think that was sort of a bit of a black eye. But in terms of disruptive, when we look at Tesla, we look at SpaceX, the reason Musk stands at the top of the mountain today, as richest person in the world, is because we're talking about some of the most disruptive technology companies in the world.
Hang on. You called him a modern-day Albert Einstein or a Thomas Edison. Is that you think, an accurate way to describe Elon Musk?
Look, I think when you look at what he's built with Tesla, as well as SpaceX, it's hard to poke holes in it. In other words, I view Musk, and it always has, is a unique individual that's been able to really transform when we look at electric vehicles as well as space. Now, with that said, execution continues to be the issue. There's also going to be many that are skeptical on Musk and skeptical on Tesla. But I think when you look over the last decade, with the back against the wall, he's proven what many thought was almost insurmountable.
I don't think many people would argue with the brilliance that Elon Musk often displays. Certainly his ability to look at the future, to visualize how things can be changed dramatically and radically with exponential technology. I don't think anybody will doubt that. But I guess he also makes people tear out their hair, right? He will come up, he will have all that brilliance, and he'll still come up and he'll tweet something about taking Tesla private at 420. His lawyers must be getting high blood pressure just thinking every night about what it is that Elon Musk could actually go out. There's been talk about Elon Musk calming down, but so far there's really no sign of it.
Look, it's been black eye after black eye, right? I mean, with Musk on Twitter, that's his downfall. And we've seen it. Now, yet again, that's also part of his cult following. Now that he owns the platform, I think he started to calm down rhetoric, but just like we've seen over the last week, I mean, that ultimately hurts, I say, not just credibility, but it's part of his image. And I think investors accept it with a grain of salt. But, you know, I think for Musk, the Wall Street wishes that he tweeted less.
So you think this is the way Musk is going to continue? All that brilliance, but at the same time, that erratic behavior will continue. He is going to keep on tweeting irrespective of what somebody says. And at the end of the day, whatever the lawyers may be telling him or something else, he's not going to bother about it. He's going to do what he wants to do.
Look, and I think Musk goes to the beat of his own drum. He's not going to listen to lawyers or consultants or whatever it may be. And that's why, you know, I think for Tesla, the Twitter situation has been a spider web. I think it started to dissipate, but no doubt, I mean, it continues to sort of be there in terms of more of the Musk tweeting and some of the risks that come with that.
Well, Elon tweeting apart, the entire Twitter acquisition itself, do you feel that Tesla shareholders or investors and stakeholders in a SpaceX or in a boring company would feel that the Twitter acquisition has been a bit of a distraction? And would they be feeling that Elon Musk should really have bigger fish to fry than worrying about what's happening with Twitter?
Yeah, look, I think Twitter was a distraction. I do think there's been a turnaround. It's become less maybe of a focus for Musk, but it's all about getting to break even, making sure that there's not necessarily more of a cash drain in terms of selling Tesla stock. It's a balancing act for Musk, but ultimately Twitter continues to sort of be his pet project. And even to the frustration of Tesla investors, that's something I don't really see changing over the next year.
All right, Daniel Ives, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective.
Thanks for being here.
Now, before we end this show for this week, I thought there's an issue that we should talk about. Let me begin by a simple question. How young is too young to be on social media? These platforms allow anyone who's 13 or above to sign up, but is 13 really an appropriate age to be on social media, to be exposed to everything that these platforms come with? A few weeks ago, the Surgeon General of the United States, Vikram, said he believes 13 is too young. Why? Because at that age, kids are still developing their identity. That's Murthy's point of view. But come to think of it, maybe Murthy is right. Even elevators don't recommend children under 12 to use lifts unaccompanied. You may have read one of those plaques when using the lift. So if 12 is too young to get into a lift unaccompanied, is it really the right age to be getting onto Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, encountering trolls? You must have read those stories about cyberbullying, about online harassment. Is a 13-year-old old enough to tackle these issues? Is she old enough to realize that she should not try and enact dangerous TikTok trends? The answer, I believe, is perhaps not. But there's a bigger question. What should children do about it? How do you keep teenagers away from social media? Is that even possible? Today, phones are a necessity. The internet is part and parcel of growing up. Classes are online. Activities are online. Homework submissions are online. So how do you keep your child away from the social media platforms online? I have an expert now joining me on the show who should hopefully be able to answer some of these questions for us. Dr. Pam Spell is a psychologist and she joins us from London. Dr. Spell, welcome to the show. I just wanted to understand your perspective. Do you think it is dangerous to allow kids on social media at less than 13 years? Or what age do you think it is safe? Is it safe to allow them on social media?
My take is I absolutely agree with the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. And that is that parents ought to be very cautious allowing 13, 14, 15-year-olds on social media. And there's a number of reasons. We could start with first brain development. At this age, a child or teenager's brain is really going through major changes. And it's crucial that they lay down positive and healthy pathways. We talk about things like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, how we learn thought processes. And if children are spending a lot of time on social media, their brain chemistry is being affected. Many studies show that when they get a like on, say, their Instagram or Facebook post, that you immediately get a hit of dopamine, and that is highly addictive. So there we have young teenagers with developing brains whose brain chemistry is actually altered. So this is a critical point that parents must understand, how that very addictive nature where their young teen will become very compulsive about going on because they will be seeking those dopamine hits every time someone likes their post, every time someone gives them a nice compliment about their picture or something. So that is the starting point for where parents need to think about allowing children on social media or not.
Dr. Spell, you said 15 or 16 years of age. And of course, you could argue that even adults get dopamine hits on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. So this is something that could actually continue your entire life. You can get addicted to some of these phenomena, even when you're much older.
You're absolutely right. Let me just touch upon that comment you've made about adults. We also get that dopamine hit. But hopefully, because our main brain changes occur between sort of 13 and 19, that those secondary brain changes from obviously in infancy, from 1 to 5, we get massive brain development. But the adult brain is not so susceptible. Yes, it is susceptible to those dopamine hits, and many people do get addicted. And in fact, a recent study showed that adults on average check their phones, their social media 200 times a day because they're looking for those hits. Think about a teenager. So, and that developing brain. My feeling is that parents should be very cautious about allowing a 13, 14, 15-year-old on social media. And not just because of brain development, because of things like social pressure. A study just out here in the UK about children seeking help for mental health issues found that 78% were seeking help for social anxiety of different types, fears that they don't fit in, fears that they're not good enough, fear that socially they're being judged. Well, on social media, you get judged left, right, and center. So their 13-year-old, their 14-year-old, 15-year-old were being judged on their posts. And children can be very harsh. As we already know, there's general bullying, in the classroom, outside of school, in the park where children might play. But on social media, that adds a whole extra level, an opportunity for a bully to make an impact by laughing at someone's post or pointing out that they don't have very many likes on their post. So, and there's all sorts of ways that this can happen on social media. So it undermines a child who may already be struggling with, do I fit in? And also their brain changing. So there is this huge scope for damage to be done to a young mind.
Dr. Spell, I know people are going to be watching this, parents watching this saying, look, this is all very well, but what do we do about it? How do you prevent somebody who is 15 or 16 or even 13 or 14 from being present on social media? It is everywhere. Mobile phones are everywhere. The internet is everywhere. People have to give homework submissions online. It's tough enough to control internet access or social media access for a 10-year-old. How on earth can you do that for a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old?
It is. You're absolutely right. Parents really struggle with this issue. I get asked that all the time on my website. What do I do? What age do I allow my child to have a mobile? What age do I allow my child on social media? How do I control it? Well, it's like anything else in your child's life. You have to have a good relationship with your child where you listen to them, but ultimately you are the parent and you set boundaries. And that can be very hard when perhaps a parent has has indulged and spoilt their younger child, and suddenly they've got the teenager who's used to being sort of indulged and spoiled, where you really want to set those boundaries now, because the whole world of social media is kind of beyond your control once the child is on it. So you need to have that, even if you feel you haven't had that good, respectful relationship with your child, it's never too late to set that. You talk to them. You talk to them and you listen to them. And you then express where your concerns are. You let them know that if they get bullied, if they're feeling bad on social media, they must tell you. This is the key thing. Once you establish that communication, you're much more likely to have your child say to you, "Oh, I've just had a terrible, time on my Facebook. People telling me I'm not good, people telling me I'm ugly, that kind of thing." They're much more likely to come to you. And then ultimately, you have to control it. You need to use those parental locks. You need to allocate a time when you're around. So maybe after they finish their schoolwork, they're allowed a little bit of time online. And you need to be there. You need to kind of be over their shoulder, because we live in a very dangerous age.
All right, Dr. Spell, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra.
Now, I understand many of you may have a different point of view on the story, and we would love to hear those points of view, because that's the reason for starting this much needed and extremely relevant conversation, which we will come back to again and again. This is a story that hits too close to home, and we need to discuss it. So do write to us, use #ThisWorld, and we will talk about it, and we will see you next week. My name is Vikram Chandra, and that was This World This Week on WION World is One, India's first and only international news channel. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.